They told her she was expired goods. They told her she was nothing without his money. When Suzanne signed the divorce papers, she didn't scream, she didn't fight, and she didn't ask for a single dime of Richard's fortune. He thought he had won. He thought he had discarded a boring housewife for a younger, flashier model. He was wrong. 3 months later, at the most important company gala of the decade, the guests weren't looking at Richard. They were looking at the sky, because when a Gulfstream G650 landed on the private airstrip and the doors opened, the woman who stepped out wasn't the broken ex-wife they remembered. She was the one holding the deed to their entire future. This is the story of the ultimate silence before the storm. The air in the conference room on the 42nd floor of the Sterling Harding building was so cold it felt artificial. It smelled of lemon polish and expensive cologne, specifically Santal 33, the scent Richard had started wearing 3 months ago. The same time he started working late with his new VP of marketing, Jessica. Suzanne sat on one side of the mahogany table, her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing a simple grey cardigan and jeans. Across from her sat Richard Sterling, looking every inch the master of the universe in a bespoke navy suit, and his shark of a lawyer, Mr. Henderson. "The terms are standard, Suzanne," Richard said, not even looking at her. He was scrolling through emails on his phone. "You get the lake house, the Audi, and a monthly stipend for 5 years. It's generous, considering you haven't worked a real day in a decade." Mr. Henderson slid the stack of papers across the table. "Sign here, Mrs. Sterling. And here. And initial the bottom of page 4. Suzanne didn't reach for the pen immediately. She looked at Richard. She looked at the man she had supported for 12 years. She had edited his business proposals when he was a nobody. She had used her own inheritance from her grandmother to seed his first startup, when the banks laughed at him. She had hosted the dinners, charmed the investors, and smoothed over his temper tantrums. "Where is she?" Suzanne asked softly. Richard sighed, finally putting his phone down. "Don't start, Suzanne. Jessica is in her office working. Unlike some people, she has a company to run. She's 24, Richard. She was an intern 6 months ago. She understands the future," Richard snapped, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "Look, Suzanne, we grew apart. It happens. You're simple. You like gardening and books. I'm building an empire. I need a partner who looks the part, who fits the brand. You're just—" He waved a hand at her grey cardigan, vaguely. "You're invisible." Invisible. The word hung in the air. Suzanne picked up the pen. "I don't want the lake house," she said, her voice steady. Mr. Henderson blinked. "Excuse me? I don't want the lake house. I don't want the Audi. And I certainly don't want your stipend, Richard." Richard let out a scoffing laugh. "Okay, playing the martyr? Fine. What do you want? The penthouse? Stock options? You're not getting equity, Suzanne." "My team made sure of that." "I want nothing," Suzanne said. She flipped to the back page. "I want a clean break. No alimony, no assets. Just my freedom. And I want to keep my maiden name immediately." Richard looked at his lawyer, confused. "She can do that?" "If she waives her rights, certainly," Henderson said, eyeing Suzanne suspiciously. "But Mrs. Sterling, you do realize this leaves you with virtually nothing? You've been out of the workforce for a long time." "I'll figure it out," Suzanne said. She signed the paper. Suzanne Porter. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was the only noise in the room. She stood up, leaving the copy of the contract on the table. "You're making a mistake," Richard called out as she walked toward the glass doors. "You're going to come crawling back in a month when you realize the real world eats women like you alive." Suzanne paused at the door. She didn't turn around. "You're right about one thing, Richard. The world has changed, but you're the one who forgot to read the fine print." She walked out. As she stepped into the elevator, she saw Jessica waiting in the lobby, feigning surprise. Jessica was wearing a bright red dress that was far too tight for a Tuesday morning, holding 2 coffees. "Oh, Suzanne," Jessica chirped, her smile sharp enough to cut glass. "Leaving so soon? Richard and I were hoping you'd be reasonable about the furniture." Suzanne looked at the girl. She saw the ambition, the arrogance, and the naivety. "He's all yours, Jessica. Make sure you check his pockets. He tends to lose things, like his loyalty." Dun. Suzanne walked out of the building and into the bustling streets of New York. It was raining. She pulled her coat tighter, walked 2 blocks to a nondescript black sedan waiting at the curb, and opened the back door. She slid inside. The interior was warm, smelling of aged leather. "Is it done?" the man in the front seat asked. He didn't look like a driver. He was typing on a secure laptop. "It's done," Suzanne said, pulling a different phone, a burner, out of her bag. "He signed. He thinks I'm destitute. He has no idea I legally separated my grandmother's trust from his assets 5 years ago. And the shares? He was so busy looking at his new girlfriend, he didn't notice that the asset waiver he signed had a clause releasing the Porter intellectual property holdings back to the original grantor." Suzanne looked out the window at the skyscraper she had just left. "He thinks he owns the code that runs his logistics software," she whispered. "He forgot I wrote the base algorithm in our basement 10 years ago, and today he just signed away the rights to use it." "What's the move, Miss Porter?" Suzanne smiled, and for the first time, it wasn't a sad smile. It was predatory. "Take me to Teterboro Airport. Sebastian is waiting. We have a company to buy." 3 months later, Richard Sterling was on top of the world. Sterling Harding Logistics had just posted record quarterly profits. His face was on the cover of Forbes under the headline, "The King of Supply Chain." He stood on the balcony of his penthouse, sipping a scotch. Jessica came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist. She was wearing a silk robe he had bought her in Milan. "You seem tense, babe," she purred. "The gala is in 2 days. You should be happy. Everyone who matters is coming." "I know," Richard said, frowning at his phone. "It's just, we've had some weird glitches in the system this week. Shipments rerouting, data lags. My tech guys say it's just server migration, but it's annoying." "Don't worry about it," Jessica said, taking the phone from him. "Focus on the party. I've invited the governor, the heavy hitters from Silicon Valley, and—" "Oh, I did something funny." Richard raised an eyebrow. "What?" "I sent an invite to Suzanne." Richard choked on his drink. "You what?" Jessica giggled. "Oh, relax. I sent it to that little apartment she rented in Queens. She won't come. And if she does, let her see what she missed. Let her see us. It's the ultimate power move, Richard. It shows you're totally over it." Richard thought about it. He imagined Suzanne, likely wearing some frumpy dress, standing in the corner while he toasted to his billions with Jessica on his arm. It did feel good. "You're wicked," he grinned. "All right. Let her come. If she can even afford the Uber to the venue." Meanwhile, in London, the office was located in a restored Victorian warehouse, but the interior was pure 22nd century. Holographic displays floated above desks. The hum of servers was a constant vibration in the floor. Suzanne Porter stood by the window, looking out at the Thames. She wasn't wearing a grey cardigan anymore. She was wearing a tailored white power suit by Alexander McQueen, her hair cut into a sharp, chic bob. She looked 10 years younger and 20 times more dangerous. "We have the confirmation," a deep voice said behind her. Suzanne turned. Sebastian Cross sat on the edge of her desk. Sebastian was a man who made Richard Sterling look like a used car salesman. He was 42, with silver-streaked black hair and eyes that were unsettlingly intelligent. He was known in the financial world as the Silencer. He didn't buy companies. He dismantled them and rebuilt them better. He was a billionaire 3 times over, and the only person in the world who knew Suzanne's true genius. They had met at a tech conference 15 years ago, before Richard, before the marriage. They had stayed in touch via encrypted channels, purely discussing code and math. When Suzanne walked out of Richard's office 3 months ago, Sebastian's jet was the one waiting. "He invited me," Suzanne said, holding up the thick, gold-embossed invitation card that had been forwarded to London. Sebastian laughed, a low, rumbling sound. "Of course he did. He's arrogant. He thinks you're defeated." "He doesn't know about Project Ether?" Suzanne asked. "No one knows," Sebastian said, standing up and walking toward her. "The market thinks a shell company called Obsidian Group is quietly buying up the shipping lanes in the Pacific. They have no idea Obsidian is you." Suzanne ran her thumb over the embossed letters, "The Sterling Gala, black tie only." "The software license expires at midnight on the night of the gala," Suzanne said. "I buried the kill switch in the update he authorized yesterday. Once the clock strikes 12, his entire logistics grid goes dark. Unless he negotiates with the owner of the IP," Sebastian finished. "Which is you." Suzanne looked at Sebastian. "I need to go there. I need to look him in the eye when it happens." Sebastian nodded. "I was hoping you'd say that. I've had the G650 prepped." "And Suzanne?" "Yes?" "We aren't just going to attend. We're going to make an entrance. I made a few calls to the fashion houses in Paris. If you're going to burn his kingdom down, you should look like a queen while doing it." Suzanne tossed the invitation onto the glass table. "He wanted a trophy wife, Sebastian. He's about to find out why you should never keep a tiger in a cage." The day of the gala. The venue was an exclusive private airfield in the Hamptons. Richard had rented a massive hangar and converted it into a crystal ballroom. Private jets were parked in the distance as backdrops. It was a display of excess that bordered on obscene. Paparazzi lined the red carpet. Richard and Jessica were working the line. Jessica was wearing a gold sequined dress that left very little to the imagination. She was basking in the flashes. "Mr. Sterling! Mr. Sterling!" a reporter yelled. "Is it true Sterling Logistics is looking to acquire the Asian markets? We are always expanding." Richard beamed, flashing his veneers. "Nothing can stop us." A low rumble began to vibrate through the ground. It wasn't the bass from the DJ. It was a turbine engine. The crowd quieted down. The guests turned towards the runway. "Is someone else?" "Lauren and Nena wanting?" Jessica asked, annoyed. "Everyone was supposed to be here by 8. "Probably late arrivals," Richard waved it off. "Maybe Musk or Bezos." But it wasn't a normal landing. A sleek, matte black Gulfstream G650, one of the most expensive private jets in the world, taxied slowly towards the red carpet. It didn't park in the distance. It rolled right up to the velvet ropes, the engines whining to a halt, blowing Jessica's carefully sprayed hair into a mess. The insignia on the tail wasn't a standard registration. It was a stylized silver Phoenix. "Who the hell is that?" Richard muttered. "Security! Tell them to move that plane!" Before security could move, the stairs lowered. The paparazzi went silent. First, a pair of black Louboutin heels stepped onto the tarmac. Then a dress of deep midnight blue velvet that seemed to absorb the camera flashes, slit up the leg, elegant and commanding. Suzanne stepped out. She paused at the top of the stairs. She wasn't slouching. She was radiant. Diamonds, real heavy vintage Cartier diamonds, glittered at her throat. A gasp rippled through the crowd. Isn't that his ex-wife?" Someone whispered, loud enough to be heard. "No way," another replied. "She looks expensive." Richard's jaw dropped. He literally stopped breathing. Beside him, Jessica gripped his arm so hard her fake nails dug into his suit. Then a hand appeared from inside the jet. Sebastian Cross stepped out, looking like James Bond's more dangerous brother in a tuxedo. He took Suzanne's hand, kissed her knuckles, and guided her down the stairs. The paparazzi erupted. "That's Sebastian Cross, the billionaire investor. He never goes to public events. Are they together?" Suzanne and Sebastian walked down the red carpet, ignoring the press, heading straight for Richard. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. Richard found his voice. He stepped forward, trying to regain control. "Suzanne? What are you doing here? And with him?" Suzanne stopped 3 feet away. She looked at Jessica, then at Richard. She didn't smile. She didn't look angry. She looked bored. "Hello, Richard," she said, her voice smooth and confident. "You sent the invite. I assumed you wanted to meet the new owner of your supply chain." Richard blinked, sweating suddenly. "What are you talking about?" Sebastian stepped forward, towering over Richard. "She means, Mr. Sterling, that we have a lot to discuss before midnight. Shall we go inside?" The inside of the hangar was a kaleidoscope of crystal chandeliers, silk drapery, and the nervous energy of 500 social climbers. The air smelled of expensive catering and desperation. When Suzanne and Sebastian entered the main ballroom, the room didn't just go quiet. It shifted. The gravity of the party moved towards them. Richard Sterling, standing near the ice sculpture with a forced smile, watched as his biggest investors drifted away from him, drawn like moths to the light of Sebastian Cross. Sebastian was a legend. He was the kind of billionaire who didn't give interviews, didn't attend parties, and didn't lose. And he was holding Suzanne's hand like she was the Hope Diamond. "Breathe," Sebastian whispered to Suzanne as a waiter offered them vintage Dom Perignon. "They are terrified of you." "They're terrified of you," Suzanne corrected, taking a glass. "No," Sebastian smirked. "I'm just money. You're the mystery. Look at them. They're trying to figure out how the dowdy housewife became the woman wearing a necklace worth more than this entire building." Across the room, Jessica was fuming. Her gold dress, which had felt so triumphant an hour ago, now looked cheap compared to Suzanne's understated, regal velvet. She downed her 3rd martini and narrowed her eyes. "She's ruining everything," Jessica hissed at Richard. "Do something. Kick them out." "I can't kick out Sebastian Cross, Jessica. He owns the bank that finances our debt," Richard snapped, wiping sweat from his forehead. He checked his phone again. Another server alert. "Error 404. Critical latency." He shoved the phone in his pocket. "I need to go schmooze the senator. Keep it together." Richard walked away, leaving Jessica alone. That was her mistake. Without Richard to anchor her, Jessica's insecurity took the wheel. She grabbed 2 of her friends, young, vapid influencers she had hired as brand ambassadors, and marched toward Suzanne. Suzanne was currently laughing at a joke made by the CEO of a major tech rival. "Well, well," Jessica's voice cut through the conversation. She plastered a fake, pitying smile on her face. "I'm surprised you actually came, Suzanne. I didn't think you'd be comfortable in a crowd like this. It's a bit above your pay grade, isn't it?" The circle of CEOs and elites went silent. It was a direct, classless attack. Suzanne slowly turned her gaze to Jessica. She didn't look angry. She looked at Jessica the way a scientist looks at a microbe in a petri dish. "Hello, Jessica," Suzanne said calmly. "The party is lovely, although the lighting is a bit harsh for that fabric. Polyester reflects so poorly." A few people stifled chuckles. Jessica flushed red. "It's custom silk," Jessica snapped. "But I wouldn't expect you to know fashion. Tell me, did you blow your entire alimony check on that rental dress, or did Mr. Cross pay for it? It's sad, really, trading one man for another just to stay relevant." The room gasped. That was a line you didn't cross. Sebastian took a step forward, his eyes darkening, but Suzanne put a hand on his chest to stop him. She stepped closer to Jessica, invading her personal space. "Let's clarify a few things," Suzanne said, her voice low but projecting perfectly in the silence. "First, I didn't get alimony. I declined it. Second, this dress isn't a rental. It's a gift from the designer, who happens to be a personal friend of Sebastian's. And third," Suzanne leaned in, her eyes locking onto Jessica's terrified pupils, "I didn't trade men. I upgraded my life. You think you won, Richard? You think you stole him?" Suzanne laughed softly, a cold sound. "Jessica," I left the door unlocked. I left the leash on the table. You didn't catch a prize. You caught a problem. And judging by the way Richard is sweating over there by the buffet, I'd say the problem is about to become unmanageable." "You're just jealous," Jessica stammered, losing steam. "We're building an empire." "You're building a house of cards on a foundation of sand," Suzanne replied, "and I'm the weather." Before Jessica could respond, an older man with white hair approached the group. It was Senator Bradley, the most powerful man in the room. He ignored Jessica completely. "Mrs. Sterling, oh, excuse me, Miss Porter," the senator said warmly, extending a hand to Suzanne. "Sebastian told me you're the mind behind the ether algorithm. I've been dying to meet you. The Defense Department is very interested in your encryption protocols." Jessica stood there, mouth open. The Defense Department? Algorithms? Suzanne was just a housewife who baked cookies. What was happening? "I'd love to discuss it, Senator," Suzanne smiled, turning her back on Jessica. "Shall we find a quieter table?" As Suzanne walked away with the senator and Sebastian, the crowd parted for her again. Jessica was left standing alone in her gold dress, clutching her empty martini glass, realizing with a sinking dread that she was no longer the main character in her own story. 10:45 p.m. Richard Sterling was in the war room, a makeshift office set up in the back of the hangar behind black curtains. The party was raging outside, bass thumping against the thin walls. But inside, the mood was funeral. "What do you mean, access denied?" Richard screamed, slamming his hand on the desk. His chief technologies officer, CTO, a brilliant but currently terrified young man named Dave, was typing furiously on a laptop. "I don't know, Richard. It's the legacy code, the core logistics kernel. It's locking us out. It started with the Asian servers, and now it's spreading to Europe. Our trucks aren't getting routing data. Ships are sitting in ports, unable to unload because the digital manifests are encrypting themselves. Fix it," Richard roared. "Reboot it. Bypass it." "I can't," Dave yelled back. "The source code has a timestamp signature. It looks like a license expiration. It says the user agreement has terminated." "What user agreement?" Richard grabbed the laptop. On the screen, a single line of text blinked in green against a black background. "License holder. Porter Intellectual Property Holdings. Status expired." Richard stared at the name. Porter. His blood ran cold. He remembered the meeting 3 months ago. The divorce papers. "I want to keep my maiden name immediately. I want a clean break. The asset waiver." He hadn't read the waiver. He had just wanted her out of the room so he could go to lunch with Jessica. "No," Richard whispered. "That's impossible. She's a housewife. She doesn't know how to code like this." "Richard," Dave said, his voice trembling. "Whoever wrote this base code 10 years ago, they put a dead man's switch in it. It wasn't noticed because it was dormant, but it just woke up. If we don't get an unlock key by midnight, the database wipes itself. We lose everything. Customer data, shipping routes, financial records. Sterling Logistics will effectively cease to exist." Richard looked at his watch. 11 p.m. He needed to find her. He stormed out of the back room, pushing past waiters and guests. He saw her across the room. She was sitting at a VIP table, laughing with Sebastian and the senator. She looked untouchable. Richard didn't care about the scene anymore. He marched right up to their table. "Suzanne, we need to talk. Now!" Sebastian started to stand up, looking ready to flatten Richard, but Suzanne raised a hand. She looked at Richard, her expression calm and unbothered. "I'm in the middle of a conversation, Richard. It's rude to interrupt." "It's about the company," Richard hissed, leaning down, his voice shaking. "The servers, they're crashing. It says your name on the code." Suzanne took a slow sip of her champagne. "Oh, that, yes, I imagine it would. What did you do?" "I didn't do anything, Richard. I simply took back what was mine. When we were married, I allowed the company to use my intellectual property, the code I wrote in 2014. Gratis. As a favor to my husband. But since I am no longer your wife, and since you signed a document explicitly releasing all claims to Porter IP, the license has expired." Richard felt the room spinning. The music seemed to fade away. You can't do this. That code runs the whole company." "Then I suppose you should have treated the developer better," Suzanne said coldly. "How much?" Richard demanded. "How much do you want? 1 million? 5 million? Turn it back on." Suzanne set her glass down. She stood up. She was wearing heels, but even so she seemed to tower over him emotionally. "I don't want your money, Richard. I have my own money now." She gestured to Sebastian. "And I have backers who make your net worth look like a rounding error." "Then what do you want?" Richard pleaded. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Probably the board of directors. "Please, Suzanne. It wipes at midnight. That's in 50 minutes. Suzanne leaned in close to his ear. "I want you to go up to that stage," she whispered. "I want you to take the microphone. And I want you to tell everyone the truth. Not the story about how you built this company from nothing. The truth about who built the tech, who funded the startup, and who you discarded when you thought you were big enough." Richard recoiled. "I can't do that. It's career suicide." "Then enjoy the bankruptcy," Suzanne said, sitting back down. "Tick-tock, Richard." Richard looked around the room. Jessica was over by the bar, taking selfies. The investors were smiling, unaware that their money was about to evaporate. He looked at Sebastian, who was checking his watch. 45 minutes, Sebastian noted dryly. "If I were you, Sterling, I'd start drafting a speech or a resignation letter." Richard backed away, his face pale. He retreated towards the stage, his mind racing. He couldn't do it. He couldn't humiliate himself. There had to be another way. He signaled for Mr. Henderson, his lawyer, who was drinking near the exit. They huddled in the corner. "Can we sue her?" Richard asked frantically. "Injunction? Emergency order?" Henderson looked at the screenshot of the error message Richard showed him. He paled. "Richard, did you sign the waiver?" she mentioned. "I signed everything. I just wanted the divorce." Henderson closed his eyes. "If she holds the copyright to the underlying code, and you signed a release, she has us by the throat. Even if we sue, the servers wipe at midnight. By the time we get to court, the company is a shell. You have to give her whatever she wants." "She wants me to confess," Richard said, his voice breaking. "On stage." "Then you better make it a good performance," Henderson said, "because the alternative is prison for fraud when the shareholders find out you lost the company due to negligence." 11:30 p.m. The lights in the hangar dimmed. The DJ stopped the music. A spotlight hit the stage. Richard Sterling walked up the stairs to the microphone. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. He tapped the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice cracked. Could I have your attention for a moment?" The crowd quieted. Jessica smiled from the front row, thinking this was the speech where he announced the new profits. She held up her phone to record it. Suzanne sat in the back, in the shadows, watching. "There is something I need to say," Richard began, his hands gripping the podium, "about the success of Sterling Logistics, about how we got here." He looked at Suzanne. She was checking her watch. 11:45 p.m. He took a breath, and then he froze, because Jessica had just climbed onto the stage beside him, grabbing the mic. "What Richard is trying to say," Jessica beamed, unaware of the nuclear bomb ticking under her feet, "is that we are so happy you're all here to celebrate our victory." Richard looked at Jessica with pure horror. "Get off the stage, Jessica," he whispered. "No, silly." She laughed into the mic. "I have a surprise. I've arranged for a video montage of our best moments." She signaled the tech booth. The massive screen behind them lit up, but it wasn't a montage of Richard and Jessica. The screen flickered, turned black, and then red text appeared, massive and ominous, for everyone to see. "System critical, unauthorized user, deletion imminent, 10 minutes. The crowd gasped. Murmurs broke out. "What is that?" Jessica squeaked. Richard closed his eyes. The countdown wasn't just on the servers anymore, it was on the big screen. Suzanne hadn't just rigged the back end, she had rigged the presentation. Suzanne stood up from her table. "It seems we have technical difficulties," her voice rang out from the floor, clear and projecting. "Perhaps the owner of the system should step in?" The silence in the hangar was heavier than the steel beams holding up the roof. 500 of the world's wealthiest people were staring at the stage, where the screen pulsed with a red countdown. 0 hours, 9 minutes, and 59 seconds. Suzanne walked towards the stage. She didn't rush. The click of her heels on the polished floor was rhythmic, like the ticking of a clock. Sebastian Cross walked a step behind her, carrying a slim leather portfolio. He looked like an executioner in a tuxedo. Jessica, still clutching the microphone, looked down at Suzanne with a mix of confusion and fury. "Security!" she shrieked, her voice cracking. "Remove this woman! She's hacking our system!" 2 large security guards stepped forward, but Sebastian simply held up a hand. He didn't touch them. He just looked at them with the cold, dead stare of a man who owned the security firm they worked for. "I wouldn't," Sebastian said calmly, "unless you want your pension funds, which are managed by my bank, to experience a sudden glitch." The guards hesitated, then stepped back. Money always spoke louder than loyalty. Suzanne ascended the stairs. She looked at Richard, who was trembling, his face a mask of sweat and terror. She reached out and gently took the microphone from Jessica's hand. Jessica tried to pull it back, but Suzanne's grip was iron. "You're done, Jessica," Suzanne whispered. "Go stand in the corner." Suzanne turned to the crowd. She didn't look like a scorned ex-wife. She looked like a CEO. "Good evening," Suzanne said, her voice steady. "I apologize for the interruption to your gala. My name is Suzanne Porter. For the last 10 years, most of you knew me as Richard's wife. You saw me hosting dinners, arranging flowers, and standing silently in the background." She gestured to the screen behind her. 0 hours, 8 minutes, and 30 seconds. "What you didn't know," she continued, "is that before I was a wife, I was a mathematician. And in 2014, in a basement apartment in Brooklyn, I wrote the logistics algorithm that Richard Sterling has been selling you as his own genius." A gasp went through the room. Cameras were flashing blindingly now. Reporters were live streaming. "That can't be true!" Jessica yelled from the side of the stage. "Richard built this! You're just a leech!" Suzanne ignored her. She turned to the board of directors, who were huddled near the front table, looking terrified. "Gentlemen," Suzanne said, "the countdown you see is a copyright expiration protocol. When Richard and I divorced 3 months ago, he was so eager to move on to his new life that he signed a full release of my intellectual property. He didn't read the contract. He didn't think I was capable of owning anything of value." She turned to Richard. He looked like he was about to vomit. "Richard," she said, Tell them who wrote the code." Richard looked at the crowd. He looked at the countdown. 0 hours, 6 minutes, and 45 seconds. If the code wiped, the company stock would hit 0 by morning. He would be sued for fraud. He would go to prison. "She did," Richard croaked. The microphone caught it, but it was quiet. "Louder," Suzanne commanded. "She did." Richard screamed, tears of frustration in his eyes. "Suzanne wrote it. It's her code, okay? Are you happy?" The crowd erupted. The king of supply chain had just admitted he was a fraud. "Thank you," Suzanne said. "Now we have a problem. In 6 minutes, Sterling Logistics ceases to function. The ships stop. The trucks stop. The stock becomes worthless paper." "Fix it," a shareholder shouted from the front row. "Whatever you want, just fix it." Suzanne smiled. It was the moment she had waited for. "I can fix it," she said. "I have the encryption key, but I'm not giving it away for free. Not this time." Sebastian stepped forward. He opened the leather portfolio and pulled out a single document. He placed it on the podium in front of Richard. "This," Suzanne said, "is a transfer of ownership. It assigns 51% of the voting stock of Sterling Logistics to the Obsidian Group, a holding company owned by me. It also demands the immediate resignation of the current CEO and the VP of Marketing, effective immediately. Jessica rushed forward, grabbing Richard's arm. "Don't sign it, Richard. She's bluffing. We can fight this in court." "There is no court," Richard yelled at her, shaking her off. "Look at the screen, you idiot! We have 4 minutes." He looked at the document. It was a complete surrender. He would keep his minority shares. He would stay rich, but he would lose his power. He would lose his title. He would answer to her. "If I sign this," Richard whispered, "I'm nothing." "If you don't sign it," Suzanne replied coolly, "you're not just nothing. You're indigent, and you're going to jail for selling technology you didn't own." 0 hours, 3 minutes, and 0 seconds. The tension in the room was suffocating. The senator was watching with wide eyes. The investors were screaming at Richard to sign. "Do it, Sterling!" someone yelled. "Don't burn my money!" Richard picked up the pen. His hand was shaking so badly he could barely hold it. He looked at Jessica, the trophy he had destroyed his marriage for. She looked small, petty, and useless now. She couldn't help him. She couldn't code. She couldn't save the company. He looked at Suzanne. She was powerful. She was magnificent. And he had thrown her away. "I'm sorry," Richard whispered. "Save it for the press release," Suzanne said. "Sign." Richard pressed the pen to the paper. He scrawled his signature. Sebastian immediately pulled the document away, checked it, and nodded to Suzanne. "It's legal, witnessed by 500 people and live-streamed to the world. 0 hours, 0 minutes, and 45 seconds. "The code, Suzanne," Richard pleaded. "Stop it!" Suzanne walked to the laptop connected to the main projector. The room held its breath. She didn't type a long, complex string of numbers. She typed a single word. A word that Richard had used to mock her for years. A word he used when she wanted to stay in and read instead of going to his flashy parties. She typed, "Boring." She hit enter. The red screen flashed green. System restored. License renewed. Owner, Obsidian Group. The countdown stopped at 0:05. A collective sigh of relief washed over the hangar. People started clapping. Tentatively at first, then thunderously. They weren't clapping for Richard. They were clapping for the woman who had just executed the most brutal corporate takeover in history, live on stage, without breaking a sweat. Suzanne turned to Richard and Jessica. "Please vacate the premises," she said, her voice amplified by the speakers. "This is a company event, and I believe only employees and shareholders are invited." Jessica looked around, waiting for someone to defend them. But the crowd had turned. They were cheering for the winner, and Jessica realized with a cold shock that she was standing on the losing side. Richard slumped against the podium, defeated. "Come on," he muttered to Jessica, grabbing her arm. "Get off me," Jessica snapped, pulling away. "You just gave away the company. You're a loser, Richard." She turned and stormed off the stage, heading for the exit, leaving Richard standing there alone. The crowd laughed. It was the final nail in the coffin of his ego. Suzanne watched him go. She felt a hand on her shoulder. Sebastian was there, smiling. "That," Sebastian whispered, "was worth every penny of the jet fuel." "We're not done yet," Suzanne said, looking at the crowd of sharks who were now looking at her with hungry respect. "I just acquired a logistics empire. Now I have to clean up the mess he made." She stepped back to the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "the open bar is reopened, and for the shareholders in the room, the Obsidian Group will be holding a briefing at 9 a.m. tomorrow to discuss the restructuring of Sterling Logistics into Porter Cross Global. Enjoy your evening." "No." She dropped the mic. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. Suzanne and Sebastian walked off the stage, hand in hand, as the music started again. This time a song Suzanne had requested, "You Don't Own Me." But as they reached the bottom of the stairs, A man in a dark trench coat stepped out from the shadows of the VIP section. He wasn't a guest. He wasn't security. He blocked their path. "Miss Porter," the man said. He flashed a badge. It wasn't local police. It was FBI. "We need to talk. Not about the company, but about where the seed money for your Obsidian group actually came from." Suzanne froze. Sebastian's grip on her hand tightened. The takeover was successful, but the war had just begun. The music had stopped again. The guests, who had just resumed drinking, froze. The sight of a federal badge has a way of sucking the oxygen out of a room, even a room filled with billionaires. Richard, who had been halfway to the exit with a furious Jessica, saw the badge. He stopped. A slow, malicious grin spread across his face. "I knew it," Richard whispered. He turned around and walked back towards the stage, his confidence returning in a rush. "I knew she didn't have that kind of money legally." He pushed through the crowd, approaching Suzanne, Sebastian, and the grim-faced agent. "Officer," Richard called out, buttoning his suit jacket, trying to look authoritative again. "Agent, thank God you're here. I was just about to call the authorities. This woman, my ex-wife, has clearly engaged in corporate espionage, fraud, and now, it seems, money laundering." Richard stood next to the agent, pointing an accusing finger at Suzanne. "She arrived in a $60 million jet," Richard sneered. "She hasn't worked in 10 years. She hacked my servers. Arrest her, and void that contract she forced me to sign under duress." Suzanne didn't flinch. She stood perfectly still, her hand still resting in Sebastian's. Sebastian, for his part, looked bored. He checked his cufflinks. The FBI agent, Special Agent Miller, looked at Richard. Then he looked at Suzanne. "Mrs. Sterling," Miller began. "Miss Porter," Suzanne corrected calmly. "Miss Porter," Miller nodded. "We need to discuss the source of the Obsidian Group's funding, specifically the transfer of $400 million that cleared this morning." "See?" Richard shouted, turning to the crowd. "She's a criminal. The company is mine. The deal is void." Jessica had crept back to the front, sensing a shift in the wind. If Richard got the company back, she needed to be standing next to him. She grabbed his arm, posing for the cameras. "We are victims!" she cried out. "Agent Miller," Suzanne said, her voice dropping an octave, deadly serious. "You aren't here because the money is illegal. You're here because of where it came from." "That is correct," Miller said stiffly. "Funds originating from a classified Department of Defense black budget account tend to trigger automatic flags, Miss Porter. We need to verify authorization." Richard froze. "What?" "Department of Defense?" Jessica whispered. Sebastian finally spoke. He reached into his tuxedo pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. It wasn't money. It was a clearance letter with a very specific, very high-level seal on it. "Agent Miller," Sebastian said, handing over the paper. "You'll find that the Obsidian Group is a sanctioned contractor for the Pentagon. The Ether algorithm, Suzanne wrote, isn't just for shipping Amazon packages. It's the only encryption logic capable of securing the Navy's autonomous supply drones. The $400 million wasn't laundered. It was a down payment from the US government for exclusive rights to her code." Agent Miller read the paper. His posture changed instantly. He snapped his heels together. "My apologies, Mr. Cross. Miss Porter, this is above my clearance. I was just sent to investigate the flag." "It's fine, Agent," Suzanne said. "But since you are here, and since you have your handcuffs—" Suzanne turned her gaze slowly, deliberately, toward Richard. "You might want to check the logs that my system just decrypted," she said. Richard backed away. "What? What logs?" "When I typed 'boring' and reactivated the system," Suzanne explained, her voice projecting to the entire room, "it didn't just restore the shipping routes. It ran a full audit of the last 3 months of activity, the 3 months where you and Jessica were in charge." She signaled to the tech booth. The screen behind them changed again. This time it showed a spreadsheet. Hundreds of shipping containers were highlighted in red. You fired the compliance team to save money for your gala, Suzanne said, walking toward Richard. You removed the human oversight protocols, and because you were too busy partying to check the manifests, Sterling Logistics has been unknowingly shipping unmanifested chemical precursors to a shell company in the Cayman Islands for the last 8 weeks. The room gasped. Agent Miller looked at the screen. He pulled out his radio. Dispatch, I need a hazmat team to the port of Newark immediately, and I need backup at my current location. He turned to Richard. Richard Sterling, Agent Miller said, his voice hard. You are under arrest for gross negligence, violation of international maritime law, and trafficking of controlled substances. No, Richard screamed as the agent grabbed his wrists. I didn't know. It was a glitch. It was her. It wasn't a glitch, Suzanne said, standing over him as he was forced to his knees. It was incompetence. You wanted to be the king, Richard? Well, heavy is the head that wears the crown, Jessica shrieked as a second agent moved toward her. I'm just the marketing VP, she yelled, backing into the chocolate fountain. I don't do logistics. I don't know anything. You're an officer of the company, ma'am, the agent said, slapping cuffs on her wrists. You signed the quarterly reports. You're liable. The cameras flashed wildly. It was the picture of the decade. Richard Sterling, the billionaire playboy, and his mistress, covered in chocolate spray, being dragged away in handcuffs from their own party. As they were hauled past Suzanne, Richard looked up at her, his eyes filled with tears and shock. Suzanne, he begged, help me. Please, I'm your husband. Suzanne looked at him. For a second, there was a flicker of the old Suzanne, the woman who had loved him, who had cared for him. But then she remembered the lawyer's office. She remembered the word invisible. You're not my husband, Richard, she said softly. You're just a line of bad code. And I just deleted you. She turned her back on him. Agent Miller nodded to Suzanne. We'll need a statement tomorrow, Miss Porter. You'll have it, she said. The doors opened, and the flashing red and blue lights of police cars flooded the hangar, mixing with the crystal chandeliers. Sebastian put his arm around Suzanne's waist. Well, he said, handing her a fresh glass of champagne, I think that concludes the entertainment portion of the evening. Suzanne took a sip, the bubbles tasting like victory. Not quite, she smiled. We still have a company to rebuild. 6 months later. The morning sun hit the glass facade of the newly renamed Porter Cross Global Tower in Manhattan. The Sterling sign had been removed, melted down, and recycled into paperweights for the interns. Suzanne sat in the CEO's office, formerly Richard's office. The decor had changed. Gone were the ostentatious leather chairs and the walls of ego-stroking magazine covers. The room was now open, airy, filled with plants and books. It looked like a place where work actually happened. She signed the final document on her desk. It was the acquisition of a European drone fleet. The company was no longer just shipping boxes. They were pioneering autonomous global transport. The stock price had tripled since the night of the gala. You have a visitor, her assistant buzzed. Send him in. Sebastian walked in. He wasn't wearing a tuxedo today, but he still looked sharper than any man had a right to. He was carrying 2 coffees and a newspaper. Have you seen page 6? Sebastian asked, dropping the paper on her desk. Suzanne glanced at it. There was a small, grainy photo of Richard Sterling. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit, picking up trash on the side of a highway. Headline, Ex-CEO Sterling denied bail in negligence case. Mistress turns state's witness. Suzanne felt nothing. No joy, no pity. Just the indifference one feels for a stranger. Jessica testified against him, Suzanne asked, taking a sip of coffee. Sang like a bird, Sebastian replied, sitting on the edge of her desk. She claimed he forced her to ignore the compliance logs. It didn't save her, though. She's facing probation and a lifetime ban from holding any corporate officer position. She's currently trying to sell her story to a reality TV show, but no one is buying. He underestimated the work, Suzanne said, looking out the window at the city below. He thought the company ran on charm and expensive suits. He never understood that the foundation is the code, the details, the invisible things. He underestimated you, Sebastian corrected gently. He reached out and took her hand. That was his fatal error. He looked at a diamond and saw glass. Suzanne squeezed his hand. The last 6 months hadn't just been about business. Sebastian had been there every step of the way, not as a savior, but as a partner. They argued about algorithms, they debated market trends, and they flew to Paris for weekends when the work was done. It was the partnership she had always wanted. An equal footing. "Are you ready for the board meeting?" Sebastian asked. "They're expecting the quarterly projections." Suzanne stood up. She smoothed down her skirt. No longer the grey cardigan of a forgotten wife, but the armour of a woman who owned her world. "I'm ready," she said. They walked to the door together. Suzanne paused at the threshold, looking back at the office one last time. She thought about the woman she used to be, the one who signed the divorce papers with a shaking hand, terrified of the future. She wished she could go back and whisper to that woman. She would tell her, "Don't be afraid. The silence isn't emptiness. It's just the deep breath before the scream." Suzanne turned off the lights. "Let's go run the world, Sebastian. After you, Miss Porter." They walked out into the hallway, the sound of their footsteps echoing, not like a ticking clock, but like a heartbeat. Strong, steady, and unstoppable. The elevator doors closed, taking them up, always up. And that is the story of Suzanne Porter. She proved that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one shouting the loudest. It's the one sitting quietly, holding all the keys. Richard learned the hard way that when you discard someone, you better make sure you don't need them to survive. Suzanne didn't just get revenge. She got justice. She reclaimed her name, her work, and her life. What did you think of Richard's punishment? Did he deserve prison, or was losing his fortune enough? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If you enjoyed this story of justice and twists, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, hit subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss a story. We have an even crazier drama coming up next week about a cheating husband who realized too late who actually owned the lottery ticket. You won't want to miss it. Thanks for watching.